tired of sleeveless dresses with armhole and neckline facings trying to escape and flip to the outside of the dress? In this tutorial, I'll guide you through the easy process of creating and sewing an all-in-one facing for sleeveless dresses so those facings stay put forever. Even better, there's no hand sewing involved. Plus, there's a fun little trick to make it all work. It's a perfectly vintage technique, but with a less fussy modern construction that requires no sewing by hand. All you need is tracing paper and a sleeveless dress pattern that opens at the center back for a zipper, and your patterns or your favorite method to install a center back zipper. You'll follow your normal zipper construction method, but you'll use this tutorial to assemble the facings and the rest of the bodice. I'll be using a pattern from the early 1960s. Let's dive in. So here's the bodice front and back of my sleeveless dress pattern, and I've laid the original back and front neckline pieces on top of the bodice. The back facing piece is shaped slightly differently because this bodice has a back neckline dart, so I'll show you how we're going to fix that in our all-in-one facing pieces too. And then here's the original armhole facing piece. These are the most annoying buggers of all if you ask me. But you can see that they would match up to the back and front if these two were sewn together at the shoulder. I'm just sort of, eyeballing this here. But you can see that that is what this matches up to. And all we're going to do here is instead of all these, we're going to draft our own all-in-one facing pieces. And since I've made this bodice before, I can show you what that will roughly look like ahead of time, just to give you an idea of what we're doing here. It's super easy. Let's start with the front bodice. I use tracing paper over my bodice pieces to do this, and what I'm going to do is just trace the top part of my bodice from the center front up and around and down to the armhole edge. I wouldn't normally trace with a pen, but I want to make sure that you can see everything that I'm doing here. If you're using an opaque paper, you can just lay the bodice piece on top and trace the shape down to about a few inches lower than the armhole edge and at the center front too. Your all-in-one facing pieces can be as shallow or as deep as you would like, but roughly around 3 inches or so is good, so I'm going to go with 3 inches here. So I'm going to mark down from the center front 3 inches and just draw a little line. And then I'm going to do the same thing at the armhole edge. So connect those edges, because this will start to form the shape of our facing piece. And now you're just going to make a gentle slope connecting these edges. And you can get fancy here and use a hip curve or a French ruler or whatever, but honestly, I just eyeball this. This is on the inside. I think that's just fine. But I am going to do this part with a pencil just to kind of sketch this out as I go. And I like the look of that. So, there we go. So this is my front facing piece, and now I just need to transfer any markings like notches and center front line and grain and things like that first. And then we're going to cut it out, but we're not quite done yet. I've cut this out, but like I said, I'm not quite done yet. Because this is a facing piece, we want the outer edge of the fabric to roll slightly to the inside of the dress. So we're going to trim off about 1/8 of an inch along the neckline and the armhole edges. It's less important for the neckline, but it's a big help for the armhole edges. So just roughly eyeball cutting off about 1/8 of an inch or so for both of these. And then if you're like me and you can never remember if you actually did this on the pattern piece or if you have to do it on the fabric, you can make a note like I did on my actual version of this that I've already trimmed it so I don't accidentally trim it again when I'm sewing it. And now we can move on to the back. So for the back, this is the same process as for the front with one exception. If you have a neckline dart like my pattern does, you need to rotate this dart out. But here's the secret. Neckline darts are so small, you could be really thorough and copy the pattern piece and rotate out the dart to the armhole and then trace it, but who wants to bother with that? So you can either just use the original back neckline facing piece of your pattern as a starting point, or you can just be like me and basically fold your little dart in when you put your tracing paper on top and just use it just like that. Perfectly fine. Okay, and just like the front, we're going to mark down 3 inches, mark down 3 inches, connect these dots. My dart did come unfolded for this part, so I will fold it back into submission. I could have taped it, but did I bother? No. No, I didn't. There we go. There's our 3 inches, so we got a straight line. Now I don't need to worry about that anymore. And again, we just need to make a gentle curve there. Obviously, this is much steeper, so I'm gonna probably, I like to make sure that I'm sort of roughly keeping this no shallower than 3 inches anywhere. And I'm probably gonna take that in a little bit. And yep, this is really how I eyeball this. And then commit to this line. Once we have this all traced, just like the front, we will transfer any markings, grain lines, notches, things like that. And then we will likewise trim 1/8 of an inch off both the armhole edge and the neckline, just like we did for the front. So we've got our back and front facing pieces now, and we are ready to cut this out in our fashion fabric. And I highly recommend also cutting this out in interfacing as well. So the front facing piece will be cut on the fold exactly like the dress bodice. Back facing pieces, there will be 2 of them, just exactly like the dress bodice, which we'll be doing a center back zipper on. So cut out your fabric, interface your fabric for your facing pieces, and then we'll begin construction. After you've cut out your fabric pieces and interfaced the facing pieces, it's time to assemble. Your bodice construction order may change a little bit with this method. The first seams you pin and sew are the shoulders of the front and back bodice and the shoulders of the front and back facings. Once you've sewed the shoulders on both, you'll want to press those seams open, then trim and grade the seam allowances, just like you do if you were doing normal facings or a full lining. Once you've sewed the shoulder seams of both the bodice and the facing, this is the point when you can optionally finish the lower edges of the facing. I just use my serger, but you could do a narrow hem or bind the edge if you wanted. And you don't technically have to do that at this step. If you'd prefer, you can actually wait until the bodice is assembled, and then you can finish this lower edge in one fell swoop from the back facing to the front facing. I don't typically bother doing that because I just tuck the ends in, trim off any little excess, and I'm perfectly satisfied with how that looks. But totally optional, up to you. So I finish this here, but you can wait until we're done and have sewed everything together if you'd prefer. Okay, so we have our bodice unit with just the shoulders sewn together, and we have our facing unit with just the shoulders sewed together. And now we're going to sew the facing unit to the bodice unit at the neckline, and then we're going to understitch that, and then the fun part of this begins. By the way, if your lapped or invisible zipper method requires you to do any finishing to the center back seam allowance before you sew your neckline, you'll still do that before sewing the neckline here just the same. That's why you may have seen my center back seam allowances were pressed in for the lapped zipper method that I'm using. But if your zipper method requires you to sew the zipper first before you attach the facing to the bodice at the center back neckline, you can just leave a couple of inches of the neckline seam open on both sides at the center back, and then just close them up as instructed when you sew your zipper. After you've sewed the neckline, you'll press it, then trim and grade the seam allowances, and clip the curves, and then understitch the neckline. Your pattern may not tell you to do this, but I always recommend it for necklines and sleeveless armholes. It makes a huge difference in how everything stays put and looks great even after washing. Just tuck the seam allowances to the facing side and top stitch around the facing. So I've understitched and pressed the neckline, and the facings are still free at the armholes. And this is the part now where it gets a little weird. So we're going to flip this so that the right sides are together now. And we're going to sew the armholes next. So flip all this in. I tend to like to have the facing on top. And we're just going to sew the armhole together along the entire seam. It seems strange if you've never done this, but trust the process. This is how we do it. So pin this and then we'll sew. So the armholes of the bodice and the facings are pinned, and we're going to go sew these, and then similar to the neckline, we're going to trim, grade, and notch the seam allowances, and then understitch as much as we can, and then do the magic trick. So the one thing about understitching the armhole from front to back is that unlike the neckline, which is just completely open, because of the shoulder, you're going to have to do this in 2 passes. So you're going to have to start from one armhole and go as far as you can, usually within a couple inches of the shoulder, and then from the other armhole to as far as you can. So it'll be 4 total passes to do both armholes for the understitching. After you've understitched your armholes, this is the part where you're going to look at it and think, this is all closed up, what do I do now? And here's the trick. So with the armholes closed and the neckline closed, we're just going to pull the back piece through the shoulder towards the front, and then everything will be right side out. So here we go. Takes a little finagling to do this, but I usually kind of reach a couple of fingers through the armhole to the other side. Hello. And then I grab the back with those fingers and just start kind of pulling through. And depending on how narrow your shoulders are, these are fairly narrow. This can be a little bit tricky, but give it a little pull, and there we go, to the right side. So we'll just do it for the other side. And here we are. Perfect facing, all in one. Bodice is right side out. We'll go press the armholes, press the neckline again, and we'll move on to the last step. So the only thing left for this trick is we need to close up the side seams now. So on the right or left side of the bodice, whichever you want to start with, you're going to place the side seams together, and then you'll open up those facing pieces, and you're just going to sew the side seam from the facing all the way down to the waistline. Now press the side seams and finish them however you normally would. In this case, I pressed the seam allowances open after I serged the raw edges. When you look at the bodice from the inside, you can see how your facings will fold down nicely into position, in large part due to the understitching. And here's how the assembled all-in-one facing looks, all ready to follow your own pattern's instructions for the zipper or your preferred zipper method. So all we have left for this facing is to tack down the lower edge of the facing to the side seam of the bodice. You can do this by hand if you want and sew it to the bodice seam allowance, but for an entirely machine finish to this facing, you can just stitch in the ditch instead. I did this from the outside in case I'm a smidge off in how my facing side seam lines up to my bodice side seam, since no one's going to see that from the inside. Just feel for the lower edge of the facing to make sure you catch it, and take a few stitches right in the seam line so it's invisible. You'll sew your zipper last however your pattern instructs you, whether it's an invisible or a lapped zipper. I did a lap zipper, so at the end of finishing the zipper, I just hand stitched the back facings to the zipper tape. So the beauty of this method is because the neckline facing and the armhole facings are attached together, you can't have the neckline facing flopping out, and you likewise can't have the armhole facing flopping out. So welcome to your new life of no flipping facings. Trust me, you're gonna love it. So you can stop cursing separate armhole and neckline facings and hand finishing facings now that you can do this easy, all-in-one, entirely machine finished facing method instead. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please consider leaving me a tip on my Ko-fi. The link is in the description. And please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And hey, let me know what other sewing tutorials you might like to see in the future. Happy sewing! Bye!